Hi, everybody. We'll get started with our webinar in just about a minute here at the top of the hour. If you are just joining us, and you've never been to one of our webinars before, at any time you can ask us questions. Just use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen down there. Just click that, and that'll open up a Q&A box, and you can send us questions at any time. We'll get started here in just a moment. Welcome to today's webinar, How Quality Professionals Can Engage Stakeholders Effectively Through Social Intelligence, sponsored by Intellex. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief for Quality Digest and your host for today's webinar. The rapid progress of digital transformation during the COVID-19 pandemic has had a pretty dramatic impact on quality and business practices. Yet it's important to remember that tools are simply one part of the people, processes, and tools triad that lies at the heart of every organization. So in today's webinar, we're going to show you how you can create a culture of collaboration, connection with community. And so basically, we're going to focus on the people part of this, and we're going to learn how to evaluate and influence your business relationships, how social intelligence is the key to resolving conflict and exhibiting leadership presence, and how conversations cultivate a culture of quality and complement technology tools. Before I introduce today's guest, just a reminder that at any time you can send questions to us using the Q&A box. You can find the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you just mouse down, you'll see a menu bar come up, and there's a Q&A button there. Just click that and you can send us your questions. Send your questions to us as you think of them during the presentation. And we will get to them at the end during a Q&A session. A recording of this webinar will be available one day after the webinar, as well as a PDF of the slides. You'll get an email with that information from Quality Digest. Okay, let's get started. Our presenter today is Gleb Tsipursky, an internationally recognized thought leader known as the disaster avoidance expert. Gleb's mission is to protect leaders from dangerous judgment errors by developing the most effective decision-making strategies. A best-selling author, he is best known for Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. Also, The Blind Spots Between Us, How to Overcome Unconscious Cognitive Bias and Build Better Relationships. And finally, Resilience, Adapt and Plan for the New Abnormal of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. Okay, Gleb, it's all yours. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dirk. I appreciate that kind introduction. All right, everyone. So let's talk about how you as quality professionals can engage stakeholders effectively. And it's not a conversation that's common among quality professionals, unfortunately so, because when you talk about quality, the focus tends to be on the process, on the activities, on technical aspects of what you're doing. Unfortunately, when you look at what actually undermines quality, it's often not the technical stuff, not even the process, but it's people. People who don't do the technical things well, people who don't follow the process, or don't even notice that the process is not a good fit as the situation changes. You need to understand your stakeholders. These are the people who influence quality. As a quality professional, you need to influence them effectively so that you can guarantee high quality, so that you can guarantee high performance for yourself. And that's what we're going to be talking about. How can you do so effectively? So first, we'll talk about some of the ways that we make mistakes about quality, judgments, and decision-making about our stakeholders. What mistakes do we make, and how can we address those mistakes? And so we'll want to understand those mistakes, because understanding these mistakes is the key to engaging stakeholders effectively through social intelligence. So once you understand those mistakes, once you understand the typical judgment errors that we make as human beings because of how our brain is wired, you will also understand the way that other people make mistakes. And those mistakes, those cognitive biases, we'll talk about what that means in a little bit, are the key areas where quality and judgment go wrong for people, where people make bad decisions that result in poor quality. And you want to be able, as a quality professional, to influence your stakeholders, those stakeholders with whom you engage, to avoid making such mistakes, which comes from awareness of these errors and then development of social intelligence as part of it to be able to influence them to avoid making these errors. So that's what the presentation will be about. That's the shape of the presentation. First, we'll start by talking a little bit about decision-making and confidence. We're told that we need to be confident in our decisions. In our decision-making, we need to trust ourselves, we need to follow our heart, we need to be very confident about how we go forward in life and the kind of decisions we make about quality activities, about projects, about other people. That is a very important message that we get all the time. And that doesn't only apply to your job as quality professionals, it applies to all areas of life. So for example, driving. How good are your driving skills? Let's think about that. And what I want you to do is look at the poll option. So you will see a poll option right now in Zoom, and you'll be able to indicate whether you believe yourself to be in the top half or bottom half of all drivers. So how good are your driving skills? Would you say you're in the top half or in the bottom half of all drivers? Please go ahead. So about 2/3 of the people voted. Let's get 5 more seconds for those who still haven't made their voice heard. Please go ahead and vote. All right, so you should be able to see the results now. And you'll see that 86% of the people here in the webinar are in the top half of all drivers, and only 14% are in the bottom half of all drivers. Well, half of all people are in the top half, 50%, and half of all people are in the bottom half, 50%. But it's either we have a very special group here in the webinar who are checking out this presentation, or there's a little bit of overconfidence going on. And I suspect it's more of the latter, because whenever I do these presentations, these are the kinds of results I get about the top half and the bottom half distribution of all drivers. So what's going on here? What is this confidence? Why did I bring this up? Because one of the most dangerous judgment errors, one of the most dangerous problems when we're engaging with stakeholders is called the overconfidence bias. Again, it's called the overconfidence bias. We tend to be very confident about our judgment of other people, of those stakeholders with whom we engage. And we tend to make big assumptions about what they believe, what they feel is right, what they believe is quality, what they will go along with, what they will agree with, what they will disagree with. And that's a problem, because that confidence leads to some disastrous decisions. And not only for us, but for them, those people who you want to influence, they tend to be overconfident as well. They feel that they're in the, most of them feel they're in the top half of all drivers. Most of them feel they're in the top half of all quality professionals, or whatever people you engage with, operations engineers, all sorts of project management folk, all sorts of people with whom you engage. They feel they are in the top half, top 10% or something like that. So that's the overconfidence bias. It's our tendency to be way too confident in our judgments and our appraisal of people, of stakeholders and other things. Now, in fact, there is research showing that when people believe themselves, when people feel themselves to be 100% confident, 100% confident, this is perfect quality, this is wonderful, it's terrific, it's great, I'll bet my career on it, I'll bet the farm, I'll bet, the company on it. What there actually ends up happening is that they're right only about 80% of the time. 80% of the time. No wonder Las Vegas makes so much money, or at least it did before the pandemic, right? People make bad judgments and bad gambles when they feel themselves confident, 100% confident. It's a tendency that we all have, and that we need to understand when we engage in our stakeholders. That is not a good thing, and it's especially dangerous for people who are more experienced, for those with more authority. So if you've been a quality professional for a longer time, and in general, if you have more experience, and especially if you have more authority, if you're in a more senior role, you will tend to be more overconfident. I'm not saying you, the person who's immediately listening to, is overconfident, but that's the tendency. That's what the research shows. There was an interesting study indicating this about doctors. What they did was they compared doctors who just finished medical school to doctors who had a lot of experience, and they looked at the kind of judgments that each group was making. And so they gave each of them a task to identify a case study of a medical problem and give a recommendation for a treatment. Now, they were both right, actually, at about the same rate. Both those experienced doctors and the junior, just finished medical school doctors, they were right at about the same rate in terms of evaluating whether it's accurate or not, the problem, and so on. But the confidence level was very different. So they measured not only whether each group was right or not, but also how confident they were about their answers. And the senior doctors were much, much more confident about their answers than the junior doctors, even though their answers weren't better. They were at the same, they got the same average rightness of the answer as the junior doctors. That is a big problem. Now, why? You might think, well, senior doctors have a lot of experience, don't they? Well, junior doctors just finished medical school and they have fresher knowledge that's more recent, that's more up to date. And you'll find the same things with quality professionals. People who are more junior, of course, they don't have the know-how of more senior and experienced people, but they do know better methods and methodology that's really updated based on the most recent trends and education and the field of quality. And so they will, in some areas, make even better judgments than experienced folks. And that is something that you need to be aware of. With experience and authority, make the overconfidence bias worse. And in order to address this overconfidence bias, you need to level down your confidence about your stakeholders. You need to start your engagement, your thinking about stakeholders, the key stakeholders who are going to ensure that you succeed or fail in your quality activities. You need to start by avoiding assumptions, avoiding jumping to conclusions, avoiding being overconfident about what they will believe, what they will want, what they will do. You need to start by asking questions about them. What are their values? What are their goals? What are their incentives? What are their feelings? What are their emotions? Humans are very emotionally driven creatures. We don't realize that. We don't talk about our emotions nearly enough compared to how much research shows they drive us. About 80 to 90% of human judgment, our decision-making, is actually driven by emotions. And so you need to figure out other people's emotions, their values, their goals, and their incentives first. And then within that context, figure out the next series of questions about how they will behave based on what you figured out. And they will often depart in their behavior from your preferred behavior or from intuitive assumptions about what would be the right way to behave. Because they're not you, and you tend to be too confident about the judgments you make about them. So that's the overconfidence bias, and that's how it endangers effective stakeholder engagement. Now, let's talk a little bit about decision-making more broadly, about our stakeholders and other decisions. We're told not simply to be confident, but much more broadly, trust our gut, follow our heart, trust our intuition, all of that. That's what gurus tell us. People like Tony Robbins, who tells us to be primal, be savage, or Malcolm Gladwell, who tells us to make a decision in the blink of an eye in his book, Blink. Those folks get paid a lot of money for telling us to do what we wanted to hear, because trusting our gut feels comfortable. It feels comfortable to be confident. We want to be confident. We want to be comfortable. And so we follow these feelings that are driven by these gurus, by leaders who tell us to trust our gut and so on. Unfortunately, trusting your gut around stakeholders often leads to disastrous decisions around stakeholders. It leads to bad judgments. So you need to not follow your heart, not trust your gut, because our gut is actually not evolved for the modern environment. When Tony Robbins tells us to be primal, be savage, he tells us to act like we're in the ancient savannah, not the modern world. And that's what our gut is actually evolved for, that ancient savannah. When we lived in small tribes of 15 people to 150 people, who were hunters, gatherers, and foragers, So a very, very important component of our stakeholder engagement, intuitions, gut reactions, our heart, our emotions, whatever you have it, comes from tribalism. Tribalism, of course, is the tendency to look for people who look like us, who share our values, share our beliefs, share our perceptions, share our background, and like that and appreciate that and connect with them. Now, in the savannah environment, it was very important for us to be tribal, because if we weren't sufficiently tribal, our tribe would kick us out and then we'd die. That's not great. And if we were not sufficiently hostile toward people who we perceive as not part of our tribe, toward people who were from opposing tribes, our tribe would get taken over. And you know what? We'd die as well. You notice with the descendants of those people who didn't die. And that is a fundamental aspect of tribalism. That's why it's inbuilt in us. It's a very powerful intuition for us to be tribal. Does not work very well in the modern world because, of course, the modern world involves us interacting with stakeholders who are very different from us, from all sorts of things, whether it's their appearance, whether it's their values, whether it's their politics, religion, gender identity, whether it's different dimensions of the company. You'll have different stakeholders of all sorts, and you will have a lot of trouble if you follow your heart and your intuition, because they'll often lead you in the wrong direction because they are wired for tribalism. And there's a whole series of dangerous judgment errors that scholars, cognitive neuroscientists, behavioral economists like myself call cognitive biases. So that's the formal name for them. You take a look at Wikipedia, you'll see a list of over 100 cognitive biases. So that's a long list. Check it out, see what, just so you learn more about them yourself. I'll send after the presentation for those who want much more information about cognitive biases as a resource. And they come from a combination of our evolutionary background, which I mentioned before, the savannah environment, and just the structure of our brain, how our brains are wired. Probably might have heard of terms like the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the source of more intentional thinking, the amygdala, more emotional thinking. I'm not going to go in depth into the neuroscience of this unless you ask me in the Q&A. And remember, anytime throughout the presentation, you can type your questions into the Q&A. So please do so. So if you have a question about this, happy to answer, or any other aspects of things. So just to add, and we'll get to that at the end of the presentation. But I'm not going to go into it right now because not super relevant. So these dangerous judgment errors. Now, I want to get at a question that probably a number of you have been thinking about as I've been speaking. Now, you probably not as you immediately saw me. I look like a normal, average, white, mainstream American male, right? But when you heard me speaking, you probably noticed I had an accent. Clearly, I have an accent. So where are you from is a question I get asked often. Where are you from? I'll be happy to answer that, not hiding it. I'm from a small country in Eastern Europe called Moldova. I was born in 1981, so just turned 40 literally 2 weeks ago on February 10th. So I was born in 1981. My parents left when I was 10 in 1991. Of course, I was a kid. I didn't have a say in the matter, but I'm really glad that they left. We settled in New York City. And in 1996, I was especially glad that when they left, when I saw a world values survey that indicated that Moldova, of all the countries surveyed, was the least happy country in the world. The least happy country in the world. I have no idea why. I was just a kid when I left. But that made me especially glad that they left that country. Now, I settled in New York City, as I mentioned, and that's a cultural melting pot. Very diverse, lots of different people from different areas, lots of different accents. So like myself, like mine, and many, many others. So I didn't feel a need to drop my accent. Many immigrants chose to drop their accents to conform and fit in more into the American mainstream. My parents taught me to be proud of my cultural heritage coming from Eastern Europe, freed from Russian domination, Soviet domination, 1991, that's when they left. And so they taught me to be proud of my cultural heritage. And so I chose to keep my accent. Unfortunately, as I found out a little bit later in my 20s, when I couldn't already drop my accent, when I was pursuing my PhD, my doctoral degree, that was kind of a dumb decision on my part. Because of a phenomenon called accent discrimination. Accent discrimination. Americans, according to extensive research, see people who have foreign accents as being less trustworthy. It's a false perception, of course. There's no trustworthiness, just because I have an accent does not mean I'm less trustworthy, right? It is an indication of tribalism. It just signals to Americans that I'm not from this tribe. I'm not from the American tribe. And that is a common tendency. There's actually only one accent to foreign accent to which this doesn't apply. That's the British accent. They still have that cultural imperialism going for them. So that false perception of being less trustworthy is one area where your stakeholder engagement will be negatively impacted, both by you engaging with your stakeholders and your stakeholders engaging with you and with each other, with this false perception of being less trustworthy. And that's a component of two broader cognitive biases. So accent discrimination is a subcomponent of a cognitive bias called the horns effect. It refers to somebody having little horns. And that is about when someone has a characteristic that you dislike because it's different from yours, different accent, different cultural upbringing, different religion, politics, maybe different parts of the organization. I've seen quality professionals and operations folks conflict with each other. I've seen sales and marketing conflict with each other. I've seen legal conflict with pretty much everyone else. So that is another type of horns effect where different parts of the organization conflict with each other. You'll have too negative view of the other people in that part of the organization or with all of those other demographics. And the halo effect is the opposite. It's where you have a little halo on your head. That's what it refers to. If you like one characteristic because you share it, it seems to be like part of your tribe, you'll have too positive view of their other characteristics. It's especially dangerous for business relationships, of course. So I mentioned as quality professionals, there will be certain departments, units in the organization with whom you will tend to have a horns effect and others with whom you will have a halo effect. And both of those in many cases will be unjustified. You'll have too much of a negative perception of people in the other unit and too much of a positive perception of people in your unit. And that is a problem. And of course, it's going to go for other people. They will tend to have too positive perception of people who they see as being part of their unit and too negative of those who are hostile to their unit or perceived as hostile. That is a big problem in companies and doesn't only apply to within companies, it applies externally as well. So hiring and promotion, for example, is a big problem where the halo effect and horns effect cause serious issues. I'll give you an example from a presentation I did in Columbus, Ohio. So I live in Columbus, Ohio. This is the home of if you know anything about Columbus, Ohio, you'll probably know that it's the home of the Ohio State Buckeyes, Go Bucks. It is the biggest kind of college football team, sports team in town, and really passionate fans here, very passionate about the Ohio State Buckeyes. And we almost won the national championship this year, just beat by Alabama by a little bit, unfortunately. Well, our biggest football rivals is the University of Michigan Wolverines. So the University of Michigan Wolverines, really big football rivals. And so I was giving a presentation at a diversity inclusion conference here in Columbus, Ohio. So there are over 100 diversity inclusion HR experts in the audience. It's a closing keynote. So over 100 folks. And this is the presentation that was given. I'll share the screen because I fortunately was able to record it. So you should right now be able to see my screen and you'll be able to hear the sound in a second.
So, as you know, I'm a professor at Ohio State.
So at that time, I was a professor at Ohio State.
Contractually obligated to root for the Buckeyes. I'm guessing there are a lot of Buckeyes fans here, Go Bucks, right? Yo, there you go. Now, how likely are you to hire a Michigan fan? See, 3 people.
3 people. 3 people said that they would hire a University of Michigan fan. That was the question I asked of these over 100 diversity inclusion experts in the audience who were there at the closing keynote. Only 3 people raised their hand that they would hire a University of Michigan fan. Now, I gave them a chance to change their mind to update their perspective.
Now, regardless of how we feel about Michigan fans and their poor choices in which team to root for, does that indicate anything about their performance as an employee? No, I know. Come on, that no should be stronger.
So you can see that I gave them a chance to change their mind, and they did not really want to change their minds. Over 100 people, 3 people would hire them. And of course, there's no reason that being a Michigan fan is going to cause you to have worse work performance. And of course, if I asked them if they would hire a Buckeyes fan over any general person, they would say so, yes, that's the halo effect. So this is something, tribalism, or the sense of a team, the sense of a passion for the same shared team causes bad judgments about your stakeholders. And you need to be aware of this and wary of this when you're making decisions and when you're guiding other people in how to make decisions. So I'm going to do a poll. So check out the poll, you'll be able to see it. In your workplace, how problematic would you say is the halo influence effect? It's not a problem, it's a moderate problem, or a large problem. So not a problem, a moderate problem, or a large problem. Please go ahead and vote. See about 3/4 of you voted. I'll give you 5 more seconds to vote. Make your voice heard. All right, so we see that for 90% of you, the large majority, it's definitely a problem. And of those for whom it's a problem, 70% see it as a moderate problem. So you're seeing where it's impacting things. It's somewhat of a problem. It's causing issues, not super huge, humongous issues, but it's causing issues that definitely deserve to be addressed. The 20% of you who see it as a large problem, that's the huge, humongous one. Doesn't necessarily mean huge, humongous, but a large problem. That means it's a serious issue that really needs to be addressed. So it's good that you're aware of this and that you're thinking about these things, and that take that self-reflection back to the workplace as you will be thinking about how to address these issues with your stakeholder engagement. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how can we actually overcome these dangerous judgment errors? What can we do to address these problems? You need to go against your intuitions. You need to go against your gut, against your heart, whatever you're gonna use this terminology, whatever resonates with you. You need to learn how to do that, and you need to teach others how to do that as well. And that's going to be the more social intelligence part of it. But the emotional intelligence, we'll talk a little bit about what that means, is going to be learning yourself to notice your intuitions, your emotions, your reactions, the ones that cause you to make bad decisions about stakeholders, and learning to go against them. Our intuitions were great for the savanna environment when we lived as hunter-foragers, when we had to face immediate intense threats in the moment and deal with all that environment, that savanna environment, that tribal environment. But it's really bad for today's world when we need to engage effectively with people who are very different than us, very different stakeholders. And you already learned how to do that in some life areas, I can guarantee that. So think about, let's say, another life area. In the savanna environment, it was very important for us when we came across a source of sugar to eat as much of it as possible. Honey, bananas, apples, that's really important. We are the descendants of those who had as much sugar as possible when they had a source of sugar, and they survived, thrived, and reproduced, right? Those were our ancestors, the ones who didn't survive. But in the modern world, that's a problem. Imagine back before the pandemic, if you're going into the office, of a grateful vendor sent over a box of donuts. Now you have an open box of donuts in the break room, 12 donuts. So you come to the box, and it's very tempting. There's sugary glazed donuts, so you take half a donut. And then you kind of don't want to leave the other half for the people there. It kind of looks bad. So you decide, okay, I'm going to take the other half. And then you're kind of triggered by that sugar, increasingly triggered. And then you take another donut, and then a third donut. And then before you know it, half the box is gone. Not that it ever happened to me, right? Or maybe you do the equivalent with ice cream. Did you know that a serving of ice cream is half a cup of ice cream? I don't know anyone who can take half a cup of ice cream and stick to that. So hopefully you have figured out ways of overcoming this sugar craving, this sugar triggering, which comes from the savanna environment, from our gut reaction. For example, maybe you bypass those donuts and go for a delicious bowl of healthy fruit. Perhaps not quite as delicious as the donuts, but definitely better in terms of your health. And so you figured out, that might be one technique. There might be many others that you figured out to address that savanna primitive environment and make better decisions. So you figured out how to ensure that you have better physical fitness, that your physical fitness doesn't suffer because of the sugar craving. I mean, it's difficult, of course, which is why we still have the obesity epidemic here in this country, but it's something that you've definitely worked on to address, to overcome, and so that you can manage it better. In the same way, you need yourself to work on building up your mental fitness. So physical fitness, that's our health, diet, exercise. Our mental fitness is our ability to have good mental habits and make good decisions. You need to figure out how to make those good decisions. And in order to do that, you need to understand the way that our decisions about our stakeholders go wrong. So you need to understand that. And so now I want to ask you in another poll, what about decision making? Was there ever a time when you were very confident that you were right about something and you turned out to be wrong? Was that ever something that happened to you? I mean, I know it happened to me. There was a time when I promoted someone who was an assistant manager in my company. So I run a company called Disaster Avoidance Experts, as Dirk mentioned, training, consulting, coaching in future proofing. So it's a future proofing consultancy, and promoted someone to an assistant manager role from just staff member role. I thought she would work out. I thought she would do well. But unfortunately, I was pretty wrong. I was pretty confident in her, but I was wrong. And she was really a micromanager. She couldn't let go of her previous role, her previous relationships. It did not work out well. So yeah, so let's see. I think there are about 2/3 of the people who voted. So let's give folks another 5 seconds. Make your voice heard. All right, so we see that this is something that happened to the vast majority of you. 98% of you share the same experience that I had, where you were very confident about something that you thought was going to be right, and you turned out to be wrong. And that is something that you need to internalize that experience and remember it, because that's the sense of confidence that comes from these dangerous judgment errors. That confidence, and then you realize, okay, you were wrong to make that decision. And so you need to have that internal experience and sense that as part of growing your emotional intelligence and social intelligence. But that's going to be more about emotional intelligence, your self-awareness. So this presentation is talking about using the skills of social intelligence. I want to highlight the difference between emotional intelligence and social intelligence. In order to manage your stakeholders, you need social intelligence. In order to manage yourself, you need emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence has to do with being aware of what's going on within you, your emotions, your intuitions, when they're pushing you to make bad decisions about your stakeholders, and your ability to manage yourself, not simply be aware of it, but being able to manage your emotions. Again, emotions determine the large majority of our decision making for anyone, no matter how rational and analytical you think you are. I'm a very analytical person, and I know that the research on this topic shows that 80 to 90% of my decisions are determined by emotions, just like yours, just like everybody else's. So you need to be aware of and able to manage your emotions. Retrain your emotions from those primal savage habits that Tony Robbins encourages you to adapt into more healthy habits, so that you don't have to think every time when you're passing by those donuts, I should have those donuts. Instead, you should have a mental habit, which is where you develop a habit of going for the salad, or going for the fruit. You know, nobody's born liking salad. That is not an experience we have. Babies like candies. Salad is an acquired taste. So you need to acquire that taste and acquire that appreciation for more healthy habits. That's emotional intelligence. Now, social intelligence has to do with others. It's about being able to be aware of other people and being able to manage their emotions and their relationships with you and with each other. Again, they're driven by their emotions, as we all are, and the relationships with each other are the key aspects of stakeholder management. So you need to understand, be aware of these other people's emotions and relationships, and be able to manage them. Now, the awareness and management is going to be really facilitated by understanding these dangerous judgment errors, these cognitive biases. And there's an assessment on cognitive biases and these dangerous judgment errors in the workplace that I'll send you after the presentation if you want it. It focuses on the 30 most dangerous ones. I told you there's over 100, not all of them are relevant to the workplace. The 30 most dangerous ones are in the assessment. It helps you evaluate their extent and their impact in your workplace of these cognitive biases, and provides you with specific next steps you can take to address them. So let me show you what this assessment looks like. And at this point, you'll want to bring up the chat because we'll be using the chat feature. So you should be able to see my screen. Now, notice of this assessment, each question refers to a specific problem that occurs in everyday situations. It's not about asking, overconfidence bias, halo effect, horns effect. That's not what it's about. It's asking, you don't need to know anything about cognitive biases in order to take the assessment. It's asking about behaviors, which everyone knows, everyone can observe whether they're happening or not. So your goal is simply to indicate how often the problem occurs in your workplace in the past year, just as a percentage of the situations, out of all the situations when it might have occurred. So you can focus on a specific unit, you can focus on a team or your organization as a whole. So just right now, focus on your immediate workplace, whether it's an organization, depending on your role. If you're a leader, if you're in a top leadership role, quality VP, then focus on more of the organization. If you're a team member, focus on the team, whatever. Don't overthink it. Just go with your initial impression. Each question should take you 10, 15, 20 seconds. So bringing up the chat feature. When a potential or current employee was evaluated, in what % of the situations was the evaluation too positive due to factors not relevant to their organizational fit? So factors not relevant to their organizational fit. Again, bring up the chat feature and please type your answer in percentage terms. What is the percentage of times out of all the evaluations when that occurred? Okay, so I see the chat is set to all panelists, and it's people are saying things like 30% from Cheryl, 60%. We have 90% from Brian Watkins. Hong says 50%. Chris says 50%. Denise says 40%. Shmuel says 75%. So these are kind of typical values that you'll see. Very diverse. I mean, Francis says 20%. So these are pretty typical values. You'll see the diverse values. It's more of a problem in some organizations and less of a problem in others. Of course, this refers to the halo effect. I'm sure you've recognized it was evaluated too positively. When you're in the 10 to 20% range, it's not such a big deal. It happens. It's not that important to address. If it's getting into the 20 to 30% range, it's more of a moderate problem. And when I talk about what's moderate problem, when you're getting into the 30% and 40% and 30-ish, 40-ish, especially 50%, that's becoming a really serious issue. So really serious issue. You want to make sure that if it's over 30%, and especially if it's over 40%, you really want to address this because it's causing inappropriate, unfair evaluations. That's bad for promotion and tenure. That's bad for collaboration. That's bad for effective stakeholder engagement. Now let's go on to number 2. Of all team conflicts that occurred because someone overestimated what out of all the team conflicts that occurred, what percentage occurred because someone overestimated the effectiveness of their skills in persuasion and their communication skills? So folks can overestimate their skills. Out of all the conflicts that occurred, however many occurred, how many of them occurred for this reason? All right. So I see 75%, 10%, Thomas says 30%, Michelle 75%, Tina 25%, Greg 75%, Francis 25%, Karen 30%. So again, range. Different organizations have this problem to a different extent. And again, if it's in the 10 to 20% range, it's not a big deal. If it's getting into the 20 to 30, that's more of a problem. And after that, it's definitely a serious problem. This is called a cognitive bias called the illusion of transparency. It's one of the worst cognitive biases for effective stakeholder engagement. What is the illusion of transparency? Well, we have the feeling that we are very effective communicators. That's how it feels to us, that we are excellent communicators, highly effective, and that whatever we communicate comes across to the other person 100%. They hear the message accurately, and that they internalize it, accept it 100%. That's, of course, not the reality, but that's what it feels like to our gut. That's how we feel. And that's a big problem, because in reality, that's not how the world works. Other people they might have technical glitches right now in the age of Zoom, where there might be an issue, sound, somebody forgets that they're in mute or something, we don't hear what they say, or there's something in our background. So that's an issue. Of course, in person, you also have issues where people are distracted. They might be thinking about an important meeting coming up or what they're going to have for dinner. They might also be interpreting your words through their own filters. What you're saying may not be at all what they're hearing. And especially if there's halo effect and horns effect involved, especially if there's horns effect, they will tend to interpret your words too negatively. In the halo effect, they'll tend to interpret your words too positively. So these are the kinds of problems that we deal with. And so these are 2 out of 28 questions that you really need to be aware of and address in order to have effective stakeholder engagement. You need to know about these problems so that you can take effective steps to address them. And the second part of the question of this assessment has specific descriptions of each cognitive bias and what to do to address it. All right. Now, I would like you to take a poll on this assessment. How helpful do you think it might be for you and your team to take the assessment on dangerous judgment errors it uncovers and address any cognitive biases it uncovers as moderately serious issues? So how helpful would it be for you to take the assessment and address the issues that it uncovers? It's about 50% of you voted. Let's give folks 5 more seconds. 5 more seconds. Make sure to make your voice heard. Go ahead and make your voice heard. All right, so we see that 95% of you, the vast majority, would find it helpful. The results are pretty evenly split. About half of you would find it moderately helpful and half of you would find it very helpful. So if you find it very helpful, then definitely go take it yourself right now after I send it to you, which will be pretty soon, by the end of day or by the end of day tomorrow. So pretty soon I'll send it to you. And then you'll want to definitely forward it to your team and encourage them to take it, depending on your role in the team. Forward it to the leader. If you're the leader, forward it to everyone. Have a discussion about the next steps that you'll take it. If you find it moderately helpful, what you definitely want to do is take it yourself and then see how useful you found it. Look through it, look for the assessment, look for all the next steps, and decide on the next steps of, well, is it going to be helpful for my team based on my experience? So that's the assessment. Then I want to talk about technology solutions, because one of the things that we don't think about is how do we actually get this internalized? And it's very helpful to automate these sorts of things. You want to not simply get people aware of them, but you want to internalize them into your cultural practices at the organization. And so socially intelligent technology solutions involve a variety of technology solutions where you can address these problems, which are often not built into the current technology we have. We don't focus nearly enough on people's minds and their behaviors and their emotions in our current technology. That's not what it's about. That's not what it's used for. But it can be addressed, it can be adjusted, it can be improved. You want to integrate and automate social intelligence practices. You want to automate people's awareness of their overconfidence. Maybe have a blog before they make a decision. Maybe have a questionnaire before they go to certain steps. Have you looked at this? Have you considered this? Have you done this? Are you assessing these stakeholders effectively? All of these sorts of things. There are many, many ways to integrate the information from the assessment, which I'll send you and from this presentation, into a wide variety of technology solutions. You might be using technology solutions like Slack or Microsoft Teams or Trello or other technology solutions for your organizational team collaboration. You can integrate this you can integrate these elements into it. Or of course, you might be using a wide variety of ERM solutions and various other specialized quality management software. And that technology can easily integrate effective strategies for social intelligence to address cognitive biases. And that's very important because you don't want to, if you can help it, you don't want to try to remember behavior and mental changes. You want reminders around you. And there is extensive behavioral science research on the usefulness of reminders and automatic defaults, which default us into better behavior, making sure that we behave in a better way. So for example, there was a study on a new way of how to get doctors to prescribe generic medications instead of specific medications for the more high cost ones, branded ones. And it found that the easiest way to do so was simply change the default in the medical records of what doctors prescribed. Are they going to prescribe this or are they going to prescribe that? And when you set the default to generic, they were much more likely to do generic, and especially when they had to justify prescribing a brand medication. And there's lots of these techniques that you can use in all sorts of software to make sure that you minimize the need to remember behavior and mental changes. All right, so this is the shape of the presentation. That's what I want to share with you. And I promised to you the resources that you would get after the presentation. So here are the resources that you can get. The assessment on dangerous judgment errors in the workplace, so the whole assessment itself. Then my best-selling book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. That is what the book is about. It's about effective stakeholder engagement through making good decisions about people and other sorts of good decisions. And finally, for the first 3 of you who claim a coaching session, I have 3 coaching sessions open. And what you'll do is I'll send out an email. The first 3 to claim coaching sessions, you won't be able to claim a coaching session after the 3rd one. It's automatically set to block out after the 3rd one. So you'll be able to click on the link. If it's still active, you do your coaching session on integrating this information into your organization, into your work, into your practice. And let's see if you want it. So we'll do similar sort of poll on post-webinar resources. Would you want to get post-webinar resources from me as the trainer? Please go ahead. So these resources, the assessment, a copy of my best-selling book, and the option for a coaching session. All right, and while folks are voting, let me take a look at some of the questions that were already brought in. Nancy Cribben says, happy birthday from a fellow New Yorker. You're very welcome. No, not happy, whatever I'm saying, welcome. Thank you very much, I really appreciate that. So Jay says that the college rivalry illustration was perfect for Taylor Horn's effects. Thanks for giving me a new way to talk and think about them. You're very welcome. And like I said, I didn't even know how well it would work when I first brought it up at the presentation. I'm glad I had it recorded. Literally 3 people out of over 100 raised their hand, and I gave them a chance to change their mind. and they did not. So.
Hey, Gleb, I've got a question while we wait for some more questions coming in. Just a reminder for people, if you do have any questions for Gleb, now is the time to put them in. If you just mouse towards the bottom, you'll see the Q&A button. Click that Q&A button. That'll bring up the Q&A box, and you can send questions to Gleb. My question, Gleb, is we've all been online. We all go to news sites and whatever, and we know that people are not as polite in comments and so forth when they're disconnected. They're not looking at a face, like we're looking at you and me right now. They're kind of disembodied. They tend to be much more rude. Is social intelligence, what you're talking about right now, is it more difficult to practice that remotely, as we're doing right now, than it is when you're actually in an office environment and you're seeing the person, you're interacting with them on a one-on-one basis? Is this a more difficult thing to practice now?
It definitely is, and that's an insightful question. So this is a situation where you definitely want to be aware that your intuitions are going to be less empathetic. So that's the problem when we are not connecting in person. Even when we're connecting, I mean, when you can see me as a small square on a screen, it's not nearly as connecting as being in person and engaging with each other face to face, seeing all sorts of body movements, tones, and that person-to-person connection. So what happens is a lack of empathy. Empathy has been shown to be one of the most important aspects of effective connection with people. And what the research shows is that we have mirror neurons which mirror other people's expressions. So when we see other people, we intuitively, without noticing it, with our gut reactions, we have a sense of what they're experiencing through these mirror neurons. And so if we're making them upset, confused, or something like that, we will sense negative emotions within ourselves that the other person is experiencing, and we will take steps to address that. And similarly, when we see positive emotions in them, we will take steps to reinforce the things that we are doing that cause them to feel good. And that really helps us in person-to-person connections. We just don't have that online. We forget that we're human to each other. It's very hard to remember that we're human to each other, that the other person and the human being is a human being. So you need to remember that and address that. And again, effective use of technology can integrate these things. That's one of the things I was talking about with using Microsoft Teams, Trello, or quality management systems to integrate ways of reminding yourself that you're human, especially addressing that horns effect as well as the halo effect.
Okay. Are there any business situations where going with your gut is okay?
There are situations in business where going with your gut is okay only when you have extensive experience with a certain situation and you have built up a healthy mental habit. So we talked about not being just able to trust your intuitions, right? Where, for example, lots of people, when they do hiring, what they do is they go through an unstructured interview. They talk to the person, right? And they just have a conversation, and they think that's good enough for hiring someone, for bringing someone on their team, for choosing a new collaborator. Extensive research shows that unstructured conversations don't correlate at all with effective hiring of the person after the fact. So you don't want unstructured conversations. You want specifically structured ones that feel artificial, that feel uncomfortable, but that are much more effective for that engagement. Now that's where it doesn't work, where we feel it would work, these conversations. Where it does work is situations that we're very familiar with. So for example, let's say going through your email. You have gone through your email for, I don't know, 3-4 hours a day, right? However long, you probably did more in the pandemic right now, however long you spend on your email. And you can very quickly tell what's useful email, what's not, what's spam, what's marketing, what's promotions. You don't need to open each one and read it thoroughly. What happens is that you've gotten mastery. So mastery refers to someone, you've probably heard the term 10,000 hours and you get mastery. You don't actually need 10,000 hours. It depends on the field and depends on the area. But what you need is a lot of practice I mean, you need knowledge, so education, then you need a lot of experience and practice and very quick feedback on whether you got something right or something wrong. Of course, if you click on spam and you thought it was a good email, you get very quick feedback on whether it's right or wrong. And so you quickly learn to tell that. And similarly, as a quality professional, when let's say you're using a certain software and you have over time gotten used to that software, you can probably pretty quickly tell at a glance at a screen on what's going on in this situation very quickly. Don't need to go through it in depth. But compare that and contrast that to when you're just adopting a new software, fancy new version of the software came out. It's much harder for you to do that. You need to learn and get quick feedback and then make mistakes in order to decide whether what's going on here? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? That is an example where having a lot of experience will get you to that stage, but not having the experience will cause you to make mistakes. So that's an example of how you want to think about things. So a lot of experience, quick feedback, that's when you can trust your intuition on a certain area.
So here's a follow-up question. In a business context, so let's say you don't have all this experience, right? So in a business context, when you're asked to make an on-the-spot decision, how should you handle it?
What you want to do is be aware, in that situation, you want to be aware of your own predilections, your own cognitive biases, and you want to address them at that time. So for example, for me, I tend to suffer from a cognitive bias called the optimism bias. The optimism bias. I tend to be a very optimistic person. I tend to be very creative, very entrepreneurial, very oriented toward, the world is full of opportunities, but I tend to be too risk blind. I tend to not see all the threats, all the problems. So for me, as a very optimistic person, I know that in on the spot situation, one of the things I need to do is immediately look for the cons, not the pros, because I will always look for the pros of a proposal. And, I have 20 ideas before breakfast and I think they're all brilliant. That's not great. When I hear a proposal, it sounds great to me because I'm optimistic. And, I tend to not think of all the cons. I tend to not think about all the other things that I would need to drop in order to go forward with the proposal. So that's one out of a number of cognitive biases that I need to look out for, that I know I have. So what you need to do is learn about which cognitive biases are going to be most prevalent for you. If you're going to be, let's say, you're a quality professional and you're interacting with a sales professional in your company, you will probably, I've seen so often, let's say it that way, horns effect between quality professionals and sales folks in an organization. So you'll want to be aware of, okay, there's probably a horns effect going on here in this on-the-spot decision. I want to probably raise my trustworthiness evaluation of what this person is saying. So things like this, you being aware of cognitive biases that you're particularly prone to, like optimism bias for me, or pessimism bias for many people, or the situation, what it's leaning toward, like halo effect or horns effect.
Okay. Before we get to the next question, just really quickly, somebody wants to know what that's hanging on the wall behind you, next to your bookcase.
Oh, this is an artwork that my wife made. Actually, I'll have to tell her that that somebody was quite interested.
Was admiring it, yeah.
Yeah, it's a crafty project that she made from recycled magazine covers. So
very cool.
Yeah,
very cool. Can you measure behaviors? I am driving a quality culture initiative in aerospace.
Oh, absolutely. You can definitely measure behaviors. The assessment is actually meant to do that. So it's essentially an analysis of current behavior. And so what you'll want to do with a quality initiative in aerospace is use the assessment, have people take it and talk about the conclusions and use that as your baseline. And then do interventions based on that. So let's say you discover the halo effect, horns effect, whatever, are issues. Then you need to take steps to address those issues. And then you have people take the assessment again and see to what extent it's been corrected. If it went down from being a halo effect of 60% to a halo effect of 40%, that's great. That's a really big reduction in that problem. So that's a very, very useful tool. You definitely can measure and quantify, use metrics to address these sorts of problems. And again, you can, if you didn't vote yet in the resources for getting the assessment, you can vote that in the resources.
Okay. And finally, because we're getting end of time here, it's a good question. How would you address tribalism in hospitals? Hospitals have a large number of various departments, tribes. These tribes really do not appreciate each other and exhibit high levels of antagonism. And the other part of the hospital tribal issue is that they have very different levels of education and career specific skill sets.
Mm-hmm. So that's actually something that I've worked on in team collaboration in hospitals. Especially I worked on a project between doctors and nurses, but of course there are other stakeholders, like let's say janitors, and there are many other people who are IT folks in hospitals, many other stakeholders. What really helps is starting a conversation with a focus group of some people on each side, and having all of them have a initial vote for themselves on evaluating how much of the benefit from the hospitals comes from their specific profession, from their specific group. What you'll inevitably find is that the answer, when you, in terms of percentages, and then what you'll inevitably find is that the answer is going to be over 200% when you add it up all together. People will greatly overestimate the extent to which their group contributes. And then you want to use that as the basis for a conversation to actually inform all the others of what you contribute, because a large part of the problem from this issue comes from people not being aware of what they contribute. Not nurses believe that they contribute the most. Doctors believe that they contribute the most. All the other staff believe that they contribute the most, or not necessarily the most, but a great deal. And they're not aware of all the hidden aspects of what the other people in these professions do. So that is a really big problem. And that's something that you need to make sure to address as part of the conversation.
Okay. Well, Gleb, I think we're at the end of our time here.
Do we want to do the poll on the
yes,
resources?
I'm sorry. I forgot all about that.
No worries.
Right.
So let's do the poll. Let's do the poll on information from the sponsor of this webinar, who has some actual information on technology-based solutions for effective stakeholder engagement. So let's do that.
So, and actually, while we're doing that one, then let's take one other question. So, if you want more information from Intellex, if you will just answer that poll. Sorry, Soanne, I know you were probably pulling here. When are you going to put up that poll? So, as people are answering that, here's an interesting question: have you got a link for the Americans are okay with an English accent? You talked about that because I teach foreign engineers. They can fake a posh British accent. Would it work?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. If they can fake a posh British accent, yes, they should. It's definitely something that you want to do. It will benefit them in their effective stakeholder engagement, no question about
it. That's interesting. Oh, let's see why we're letting people list me. Okay, just some. Just see if there was anything extra in here. Just a lot of thank yous for the great present. Was a very good presentation, by the way. Your presentations are always great. If you guys haven't ever seen Gleb before, we actually have a lot more of these Intellex webinars with Gleb on our website. You can ask us. You can go to our website and see them. I'm sure Gleb has them. Intellex has them. These are all very good. As you've seen today with Gleb, his discussions are very good. Okay, that is it. Thanks for answering that poll question. And Gleb, thank you again as well for a great presentation today. Appreciate it. You will get an email, all of you attendees will get an email, and registrants will get an email tomorrow that will have a PDF of the slides, a link to this recording, maybe some other links from Gleb as well. Is that going out in this as well?
I'm going to send, you'll send me the names and emails of the folks who wanted my resources. I'll send them the resources.
Okay, perfect. So that'll go out to Gleb and he'll respond to you. And if we didn't get to your questions by any chance, don't worry about it. I will send all those on to Gleb as well, and he can answer you offline if we didn't get to. So thanks again to all of you for joining us. And so all of us here at Quality Digest and Intellex, have a great day, and we will see you at the next webinar. So long.
Bye-bye, everyone. You're welcome.